My question pertains to two of the biggest names ever, Ric Flair and Ole Anderson. As someone who got into wrestling in the 90s, but who has become increasingly fascinated with learning about classic wrestling from listening to both the Experience and the 605, this question may have a real obvious answer, but if it does, I don't think I've ever heard you explain it. My question is, does anyone know the particulars of what happened between Flair and Ole to create the grudge, aside from Flair and Ole knowing it? All I've ever heard was Flair was on a WWE documentary where Flair says Ole burned him when he came back to WCW after his early 90s WWF run, and Ole was booking. And all I've ever heard from Ole, who may be the saltiest motherfucker in history, was on a shoot interview where he said that he always hated Flair. Flair was not a good guy. He couldn't have drawn a dime with him in Georgia. Fuck Flair and fuck you too. Also, does Ole's grudge extend to other horsemen? As far as I know, he's never had anything to do with horseman reunions or induction ceremonies, but that could be just to avoid Flair.
Well, he actually did several years ago when they put the Horsemen back together at the NWA Legends Fan Fest in Charlotte. But at the same time, all of the above. Ole was in the office when Flair came back, and I think everybody's admitted Ole probably shouldn't have been booking at that point, although Ole was not a guy who was going to fucking die on anybody's hill when having to deal with Jim Herd. He got or having to deal with TBS, right? He didn't want to be there when Herd was there, and he was doing a favor actually to Flair and some of the other guys by filling in the spot with the Horsemen when Herd fucked Tully and Arn on coming back, fucked Tully and fucked Arn too, because he reduced his money. And Ole had retired already and wasn't really into being there at that point in 90. And then a couple of years later, when they went back to him and they gave him the book, I think there's problems with the way he was booking and what he was doing with Flair and those guys. I've heard also that maybe Ole was upset at Flair for not going to bat for, speaking up for a couple years later, Ole's son Bryant, who was training at the power plant, and I eventually became the only guy to give Bryant Anderson a job, and he was a good worker, but it just wasn't the right time to be the second generation Anderson at that point. So I think, and Ole is a grumpy guy, and so I think all of the above. They just started grating on each other after a while.
I think there may be a money issue also.
There's probably, and I bet you there's some money involved too.
Yeah, I'm pretty positive about that actually.